Hello and welcome. This is it, the culmination of CyberIsle 2020. Over the past month, there's literally been something for everyone with an interest in all things cyber, whether an insight into the views of security experts and professionals from across both the public and private sectors, to what is going on to educate young people, our young people, in an informative manner. It all began, of course, with an opening address by the Chief Minister at the end of September, since when there have been daily webinars on a range of cyber-related themes, a variety of subjects related to cybersecurity and safety, from digital skills and careers to social media and how to protect your business. Now, whether you've been tuning in regularly or just dipping in for specific topics, I'm sure CyberIsle 2020 has been relevant to you and raised awareness of the steps that can be taken by you, both at home, at work, and in the community. Now, to combat cybersecurity threats, practical tools, insights to make you more aware, more secure, more resilient in the face of the growing threat of cybercrime, that has been what this has been all about. And to all of you who've contributed over the past 5 weeks, thank you. Thank you for your interest. And indeed, in a number of cases, thank you for your contributions. And you've made those on Facebook, on Twitter, and in LinkedIn as well. So thank you for that. It's a year now since the Office of Cybersecurity and Information Assurance organised what I think was fair to say was an ambitious cybersecurity conference. That was CyberIsle 2019. For obvious reasons, this year CyberIsle's gone virtual, but there's something, a great symmetry about that, I think, and today concludes CyberIsle 2020 with a virtual panel discussion. Today's questions were submitted by you, the great Manx public, via Slido, and a big thank you for those. Now, without further ado, let me introduce today's panel. To my left, in order, may I introduce Alan Chambers, who is the Government Cyber and Information Security Officer from the Office of Cybersecurity and Information Assurance. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome. On Zoom today, I also say hello to Sam Hoffman, the Information Security Manager for Microgaming, but representing LoveTech here today. Thank you, Sam. Mike Phillips, the Chief Executive Officer of Shaw. To his left, Ian Bell, the Security and Data Protection Officer of Manx Telecom. Thank you, Ian. Again, we go back to the screens. We're delighted to be joined this morning by Professor Adam Beaumont, who is the CEO of Blue Wave, but also the Professor of Cybersecurity at the University of Leeds. Thank you, Professor Beaumont. Ferran Muna Lopez, one of the partners at PwC, thank you for your time. And last but certainly not least, Brian Beasley, the Senior Manager Advisory at KBMG. Thank you very much indeed for all of your time and your contributions in advance. As I said, we have had the questions submitted from members of the public, business professionals, so I think we should go straight to those. And if I may, we'll take the first one. It is for you, Alan, no pressure. Very first question, and it's quite a straightforward one in terms of reading this to you. This viewer is asking how the police and your office, the Office of Cybersecurity and Information Assurance, work together.
Oh, thank you, James. The police and Oxia have been collaborating very closely to ensure the island is protected against cybercrime. This means that we've been developing training courses and awareness sessions for both the police officers and staff, and on the back of that also training courses and awareness sessions and briefings for the community and the public, which we publish on our website. An example of the police and Oxia working together for the benefit of the community could be what was announced recently, the launch of our suspicious email reporting service, which is for decades now, when people get phishing emails, they've been told just to delete them. Well, more recently in the UK, they've come up with a scheme where they can actually take intelligence out of these emails and use that intelligence to disrupt the organised crime and the phishing campaigns that are out there to try and ensnare you and get your money. So we've developed that in conjunction with Manx Telecom, and we've had fantastic support from them. And we've now got this mailbox that's been launched, and it's called sirs@oxia.im. And if anybody gets a phishing email or a suspicious email of any sort, we'd ask them to submit it to that mailbox. We will look at it, we will see whether it's relevant to the Isle of Man, and if so, produce advisories and warnings, which we can push out through the government website and through our social media channels. But more importantly, the intelligence is then taken from that and handed over to the UK's National Crime Agency and the National Cybersecurity Centre, and they actually actively disrupt the campaigns.
Right. That's a very interesting, informative answer, that, and I would imagine the majority of the public outside of the various sectors aren't aware of that. So thank you for that answer. You mentioned Manx Telecom there. It's probably an ideal opportunity then to bring in Ian Bell of Manx Telecom. Perfect for this, you could say, Ian, after the webinar you recently hosted as part of CyberIsle. We're hearing a lot about phishing and other scams at the moment. Why do you think that is? Why is there so much of it lately?
It's a good question. I think we've always had this sort of emails, scams and so on. So it's not a new problem. We are being more aware of it, but as I say, with working with Alan and Oxia, it's easy for attackers to produce a simple phishing email and send it out en masse, and that they're just looking for one or two people to respond to those emails for it to be beneficial for them. So yeah, you're seeing these. We're talking about it a lot more because it is, a common problem. But as I say, working with Oxia and producing the CERT's mailbox, it's helping us to fight this. The intelligence doesn't just help the Isle of Man; it helps the UK and it helps the rest of the world fight these emails.
Thank you, Mike Phillips of Shaw. Can't phone companies just block these scam numbers? Is it not as simple as that?
It's not quite as simple as that, unfortunately, James. Certainly from a scam phone call perspective, what tends to happen when they're being used is the actual source numbers constantly change. So it's sometimes difficult to block numbers, and there's always an inherent risk with blocking numbers as well, that you start to block legitimate calls. So what we tend to find is the best way to engage is making sure that we as telcos engage with the relevant authorities and try where possible to block those numbers at the source. And usually that happens via service suspension at the source. And obviously, usually with that, with scam phone calls, there's also an investigative element to that. So again, just cutting numbers off, you want to make sure that the relevant authorities are still gathering data for any investigative mechanisms they want to deploy and use. Okay,
thanks. Sam, if we can come to you. So how from your perspective then, how do I know, for example, if my data's been stolen? How could I possibly know that?
Great question, James. So two things for me, really. I think one, we need to be proactive about keeping our digital footprint secure. Be informed. So if you hear in the news or you read that LinkedIn's been hacked, a trigger in your mind should go, well, hey, I've got a LinkedIn account. Let me maybe just see if I should change my password. You can use tools on the internet, a website. There's a nice one called Have I Been Pawned, which basically you can put your email address in and it will tell you where you've registered your email address and if it's been exposed by hackers. So there's a multitude of steps that you can take, but key point would be to definitely be aware of your digital footprint and secure it as much as possible.
Thank you, Sam. We will come back to you shortly. Let's take our next question, because this is another one for you, Alan, actually. And this viewer wants to know, what are the main cybercrime trends the police are seeing on the Isle of Man at the moment?
It's really a hard one to answer. The Isle of Man really is no different to anywhere else in the world. For many years, we've thought ourselves being safe in the middle of the Irish Sea and surrounded by this massive moat called the Irish Sea. But now we are no longer safe from those physical things. In the logical world, in the digital world, we are no more than an IP address or an email address. So when these criminals are looking, they're not, in the main, not targeting the Isle of Man. They are targeting an IP range or an email address to try and scam people. They're totally oblivious, unless it's a targeted attack. They are totally oblivious to who the
just another number, are we, effectively? Yeah.
That's correct, yes. Yeah. what we've seen of late in the Isle of Man is there've been a large number of what they call smishing attacks, which is the latest version of the old cold calling telephone messages, where they're claiming to be HMRC or Amazon, or it could be any company, just basically trying to lure you into providing some details to them. And you've just got to be very, very wary of them. But from our perspective, and I think globally, cybercrime is grossly underreported. So we don't actually see the true figure or the true nature of the problem. We know people anecdotally have been scammed, and they are then embarrassed to admit they've been scammed. So we find out through third parties, but they're never really reported. And that was the reason, one of the reasons why we developed what we call the WARP, the Warnings, Advice and Reporting Point, run by Oxia, to encourage people to report the information. If they report the information to us, they can report it anonymously if they wish. It adds to the figures and our awareness of what's going on. If they give us their details, then if necessary, or we think it's beneficial, we'll contact them to get more details or to try and help them. And also, the same report can go direct to the police to make a report of a crime. But what we would say in those circumstances is that if you have provided financial information to any of these scammers or any personal details, then you should actually take steps immediately. Don't bother just putting a report in. You need to take steps immediately. Contact your financial services or your bank and get blocks done to stop money being moved and losses being incurred.
Interesting to know that there's that stigma attached with some people being embarrassed as well. Brian, I'm going to come to you. You've waited patiently. Thanks very much indeed. I think all of us, or certainly most of us, if not all of us, are parents here. So a question that's come in as a parent, what do I need to be aware of in terms of keeping my children safe online? I'm sure that's a question that you've heard being asked before. This individual says, my son plays Roblox. A lot of kids nowadays, they want to be YouTubers. They certainly do.
Yeah,
a lot of adults do too, but
they do. It's the modern world, isn't it? It's a hard one because everything is out there, so you can't really stop them doing what they want to do anyway. So one of the key things I would advise is make the home environment receptive for them to be open to communicate. Make them able to come to you, not scared of making a mistake or anything else, but put in place a structure where you know what they're doing. And if it's a new system, if your child's just about to start using Roblox or whatever, set it up with them, create the controls, know the passwords, go into the settings, make it fun for them to do it with you. And as they develop and gain confidence and you gain confidence in them, step back. But if you know the passwords and you know everything else, then you can go in afterwards and check the messaging. There's lots of guidelines out there on Roblox or YouTubing and everything else and social media. Read them, get the basics, know what your child is doing, put limits and boundaries around them, but don't make it so constrictive that they don't want to talk to you about it. Make it an open environment for communication.
And get the buy-in from them from the start in many ways. In essence, so yeah. Mike, how can you monitor your child's phone, your children's phone, to make sure they are safe and not at risk without sort of snooping on them, if you like?
Again, in line with Brian's comments, a mobile phone is no different to many of the other online services that children and many people use. So whether it's a video streaming service where you want to put parental controls in place, whether it's a gaming console, again, where you want to restrict maybe time of use. Mobile phones, again, have that type of capability. So many phones, from an operating system perspective, have parental controls, so you can do time of day settings, so you can restrict certain times it can be used, you can block certain sites that can be accessed via the phone. And then again, in the modern world, we've all got these phones that take applications, whether it be iOS or Android apps. So there's lots of apps out there that actually help parents manage their children's online experience and their use of phones, and that gives a variety of tools to parents, such as GPS monitoring, so you actually know where your children are. Some parents quite find that very useful, and it allows them to give their children a little bit more freedom potentially from that perspective. But also web filtering, logging, understanding how children are using those devices and those phones. And one of the largest issues is the amount of time that children are spending on phones as well. So again, as a parent, being armed with that information of how they're being used, you can then manage that by talking to your children and then actually explaining the risk, but also what is appropriate and when is appropriate time to use a phone.
If I could just add to what Mike said there, that for the benefit of the people on the Isle of Man who've got children in the education system, the Isle of Man Department of Education, Sport and Culture have gone in partnership with Zurich and a company called INEC, and they produce a thing called Safer Schools app. Now the Safer Schools app is being publicised throughout the schools. Each school has the ability to have its own section on it, and all the parents are allowed to gain this free of charge through the school. The school will provide an access code for you. It provides online advice and alerts about problems that are coming along, and I would encourage anybody who's got children in the education system on the island to sign up for it, because it goes from giving your child the first phone to giving advice on what gaming platforms are safe, which aren't, which have got online purchases in them, which have got chat rooms built in, and real useful advice as to how to deal with these things.
And that's available for all schools island-wide, is it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Alan. Professor Beaumont, we'll join you if we may. Is it true that social media listens to us and any privacy breaches or data mining are actually a feature as publicised by that Social Dilemma documentary? That's a question that's come in, and I'm sure you've got a viewpoint on this.
Yeah, give me the easy question, why don't you? I think that social media needs to gather data about behaviours, interests, in order to tailor the experience. That's perfectly true. The thing that I guess we're all slightly guilty of is we're all really keen and eager to click I agree to privacy policy terms and conditions. I don't know how many people actually read those. The first step is to actually look at that first piece of gatekeeping, which is what do you agree to when you sign up for a social network. The other kind of danger, and I don't use the word danger lightly, is social media is essentially a closed network. You can talk from one person to another who is part of that social media network. It's like a closed telephone network. There's a large interest in social media companies acquiring communications applications. And what happens then is we have this accidental data enrichment. So on one side, you've got your social media, which records your interests, groups you belong to. It knows about all your friends. On the other hand, if they acquire, for example, a communications application, they've suddenly got your mobile number. If those two move together, you've suddenly got data enrichment. And that data enrichment also means that not only have they got the mobile number, your mobile number, they can also get the mobile number of your friends, because your friends have also got the same communications app. Suddenly, there's a much larger data surface about you, and that can also be cross-referenced with marketing agencies. If you've ever opted in for anything else anywhere else, this data can be bought publicly. So I would say that it's not necessarily that social media is evil, but that we should be very mindful of data enrichment. And when we get to those decision points where shall I merge this app with this app, or when one company gets taken over by another, you just have to think about which data does the first company have, the second one doesn't, and do I really want these mixing together? So I don't think it's evil in its own right. It's how that data can then be accessed downstream, and we just all need to be mindful of it.
Food for thought, indeed. Thank you, Professor Beaumont. Thank you for that. Let's bring this. I mean, the whole CyberIsle 2020 is being conducted virtually for obvious reasons. So that leads us into another question that's been submitted for you, Alan. And they're asking, what is your division doing effectively to combat the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories regarding COVID-19, relating to that to the virus on a range of platforms?
Wow, that's a nice one, isn't it?
Isn't it? Just, yeah, well, I thought we'd keep it in theme after Professor Beaumont answered so well.
I have to agree with Professor Beaumont that it's not the social media channels that are really the problem. It's the way the people use them. And people have to be very careful about what they actually read, what they like, and how they respond to things on there. So when you're looking for information about something that's going on globally, such as COVID-19, our advice is that you should also always go to respected, known, reputable channels for the information. And obviously, working for the government, I'm going to say the government and the police are two of those respected channels that you should be looking at. People will put opinions, interpretations on social media that are not strictly true. They may not be in possession of the full facts, and you have to understand these things when it happens. From an Ireland perspective, we have very little control over what goes on those social media channels because they are controlled in jurisdictions outside, away from us. And so the Isle of Man government relies heavily on those countries to manage, maintain and regulate and police those channels. But as you see in the news, there are problems everywhere with what goes on. And when something's published on a social media channel, it's hard to remove it because it disseminates and is passed across all the other channels so quickly. You never catch up with it.
Interesting, thank you. Ferran, and you have waited patiently, I can assure you. Is there a need to have an antivirus scanner, such as Norton, on your computer? How important is having something like that?
These days it's basic. It's like all of us, not just as a personal, professional, in any way we should have at least this first layer of defense, which should be for malware, and this is a virus scan. Not other than that, you should have other layers of defense that these days are evolving, like encryption, like virtual private nets, where we should be all working in a more secure and anonymized name, and with the IP addresses that we were talking before, just to avoid these hacks, you should have all of these virtual private nets as well attached to them for the privacy. So the first layer of defense, and one of them is to have as you said, Norton, a virus there to protect yourself, but definitely yes.
Demilitarized Zone was something I've been hearing about in recent weeks during CYBERISLE, and for those who don't know, perhaps Ian as well, you could perhaps briefly explain, but how can you DMZ, if you like, your bank account when buying online? But perhaps first of all you can just explain to perhaps the man and woman in the street what Demilitarized Zone actually is.
So the Demilitarized Zone is sort of an area in your network or something that you would sort of separate out. It's an area where you put risky platforms or things that are open to attack, something where you have to have extra controls on just to make sure you can monitor and see what's going on. But to answer your question...
Go back to the question, when buying online.
Yeah, so I think the first thing, picking up what Florian said, is making sure you've got your patches, your software up to date, and that's on your computer, your routers, anything in your home, antivirus software, that sort of thing. Then you need to look at your bank account. If you need to have a strong password. Strong password is something that's long, easy to remember, difficult to guess. Then you want your multi-factor authentication. I think most banks these days support multi-factor authentication. And it's all about building these layers of protection around your critical assets, your critical information. Then sort of when you're buying online, don't trust someone who's offering you the latest piece of software, the latest gadget at a cut down price. You need to, well, yeah, if someone's offering you something brilliant, do a little bit of research. Make sure you understand it. You need to have that trust. And the problem with when you're in your home environment, you're already starting at a comfortable, trusting position. So you need to trust your gut a little bit more, be a little bit more wary.
Thank you. Brian, what are the key things that a business should do, or certainly should strive to do, to be secure?
You've got to look at the fundamentals first off. Understand your business. What is it trying to do? And then once you understand your business objectives, then you can then start to look at the risks and the threats and everything else that could be coming towards your business. People tend to jump straight to the end and go, these are all my threats, I need all this protection and everything else, when it's actually irrelevant. And a lot of businesses and organisations overdo the protection because they want a quick fix, they think they need it, but actually it slows down business, and that's not the point. So you've got to balance your protection, your requirements. So, like the guys have said, you know, you need to use VPNs, make sure your networks are secure, patched, updated, use appropriate software, make sure your licensing is done. Do random audits of activity and where your data's going. Know what data you've got, know where it is going, and every so often check that what you've sent has been received and nothing's happened to it. Just do spot checks, make sure your guys are up to date, monitor the threats that are out there, look on the NCSC website in the UK, link into Oxia and so on, know what threats and everything else that's going out there. Just keep abreast.
Professor Beaumont, it'd be interesting to know, with your various hats on here, if you like, various guises, what cyber threats concern you the most? That's a question that's been submitted.
Again, another good question. So the cyber and cyber-enabled crimes there's a very, very wide range. I think Alan was mentioning about a lot of attacks and threats are scanning attacks, where they're looking at a broad range of IP addresses and they're looking to see if any of them are vulnerable. That kind of attack is happening all the time. There's millions of those going on networks every day. However, what really concerns me is not the mechanism of attack, but how targeted an attack is. So for example, phishing, whether it's by SMS or by email, is a blanket attack sent out to millions of different addresses, and hopefully seeing if somebody bites, see if somebody clicks on the link to your Amazon parcel has been delivered, or check your account online, or whatever it is. That's very, very broad. So nobody's got it in for you. It's just a general attack. You then have what's called spear phishing. Spear phishing is when you've got a particular fish in mind and you target the attack to target a particular company. So you could be emulating a particular supplier or pretending to be their CFO or something like that to actually do something that's very, very tailored. Now, those kinds of attacks are far more dangerous. And then there's the thing that scares the bejesus out of me, which is at the top of the tree, which is something called whaling. And whaling is basically, that's going after the big fish. That's going after the person at the top of the tree, really lining yourself up against them, looking at every aspect of their life and how you would get into it, or how you would first get into it and then widen the gap. And it's almost like a sleeping attack, because they would then infiltrate every aspect of your life, bank account, reputation, and slowly eke away at it. And a lot of times, people do not know that this is actually happening. There's a really good book. It's £4.49 of money well spent, called Whaling for Beginners, and it's quite a scary story for a company CEO. And as a CEO myself, this is the kind of thing that worries me. So I hope that's honest enough.
Thank you very much for that. I'm sure it's available at good bookshops and a lot of not so good ones as well. I'm sure it would be an interesting read. No, thank you, Professor Beaumont. Sam, let's go back to you, because you're forging a successful career. But what can organisations do to actually encourage more women into technical and cyber careers, do you think, just from your perspective?
For me, I think it's important that organizations create environments and spaces where women, but everybody really feels free to move and don't have a fear to explore and grow in their own careers. Within microgaming, we have had a very successful story where one of our HR staff members applied to become the identity and access manager in the security team. It's a year in, and it's really amazing to look back at what she's achieved. And it was ironic because we sat the one day and we actually looked back and we said, your inherent fear was the fact that you weren't technical. And now she's walking into meetings and she's holding her own conversation from a technical perspective. And in addition to that, I think if a CV doesn't tick all your boxes at the time when you're interviewing for jobs, look at the person. Is this person passionate about what they're going to do? Is there hunger within them to learn? You know, and just create those opportunities for all staff and women. From a younger generation perspective, I think it's important that we expose our younger generations to STEM. And I think if people on Ireland see initiatives that the Love Tech Group is doing, or the wider audience within other areas, expose your younger generation to technology, and let's eliminate that fear to say, hey, I'm not technical, because nobody was technical and we all learned, right? So, yeah.
Interesting. I suppose in many ways that question shouldn't have to be asked nowadays, should it? The difference between a man or a woman, we should just...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you very much indeed. Ferran, one of the final questions before we just open the discussion up to the panel, the group. As cyber or digital becomes more the norm in everyone's lives, do you think the Isle of Man is keeping pace, or is there a skills gap? And if there is a skills gap, what can be done to fix that and to remedy it?
Well, if we go back and look at the Isle of Man and the economy, we can say that the main sectors in the Isle of Man are finance and e-gaming. These two sectors are one of the sectors that are always forward-thinking and going ahead of the others more manual, like manufacturing or transporting and all of that. This means that the island has always been well-positioned and has always been doing well. Having said that, if we look at what the technology is coming, how these new technologies are going to impact, what it means is, although we've been managed to cover all the gaps in the past, from now, we need to start thinking, what is it going to impact us in the next 5, 10, and 15 years, and how do we train today our people, starting all of the panels sitting here by reskilling ourselves, which will mean we'll have to keep pace about what's coming. And the other point that has been raised as well within the panel is, with our educational system, what are the skills and how are we educating our children for making sure when they go into the work, which is going to be in the next, as I said, 10, 15 years, do they have the skills needed that are expected to have at that time? So when we are all thinking about this, there are a real skill gap, I would say maybe today the real skill gap are the skills that we can see for different offers and different individuals that we are looking for. However, the main skill gap will come in the near future if we don't start working today.
Thank you. Let's open this up because I think this is a basic question, but a very good question. And I want to put it to each and every one of our panelists, if I may. By all means, ad lib if you wish, or just give me an age. There's not a right or a wrong answer as such. But if I take it from Brian first, if I go to the far end of the room, what is the panel's view on an appropriate age for children to have a mobile phone?
That is a very, very hard question.
And no answer will be the same.
No answer will be the same. For me, my own personal view, I think having a mobile phone from when they are being entrusted to be on their own, such as commuting to school if they've got a long journey, etc., etc. Below that age, I've no issue with having a mobile phone or an iPod Touch, for example, or a Fire, a pad, or something like that with parental controls. If they're going to be placed on their own somewhere where they may need to get back in touch with you, or you're going to be late getting from work or whatever, they're at a football club, that's when you've got to start doing it, but put controls in place. I don't know, 11, 10, 11?
Ferran?
Yeah, well, this is a discussion we always have at home at this point, because you can see children starting at a very early age. What we've noticed, though, is that there are different use of phones. So you can have phones with, as Mike has said before and was saying, is with different limits. So I think there is no real age. And as Brian said, this is the age where you feel they need one for different reasons. Let's say they go to higher school and they are more dependent on you and they need more mobility. From my personal view, I would say the later the better they have exposure to social media, because it's very difficult for them to understand it, and I don't think at such an early age they are mentally prepared to see some of the things that they see in social media and to understand really what it means.
Professor Beaumont, you obviously see the students at the other end of the age scale, but they've all got them by then, I would imagine.
Oh, for sure. But back to my own kids, the age that they got phones was again, as other panel members have just said, was coupled to the age where they need to be on their own, they need to be on the school bus. But also, we've had those conversations around what they do on their phones. And when there's a new app to be downloaded, it doesn't need parental permission. So we can have a conversation about, well, what does this app do? Who else uses it? Are all your friends on it? Why are they on it? And just making sure that they're not sort of unlocking the floodgates to something that could be really quite harmful.
Ian, if little Johnny's got one or Sally's got one, you can guarantee your own children will want one, won't they?
Yeah, it's exactly. I mean, as Brian was saying earlier, it's about having that conversation with your children and judging yourself whether they are old enough to have that phone. The other side of it, as we talked again, is social media. There are real age limits for social media, and you should respect them. But it's always about having that constant communication, making sure they can talk to you about things they're experiencing and things that their friends are doing. My kids get a harder time than most because my wife and I do review what apps they're installing, and there's some apps that they're just not allowed.
No go. Yeah. But Mike, I would imagine in the telecom and Shaw shops that it's not irregular for parents to come in with their children and to talk through things like this.
Absolutely, and I suppose one of the things we have to recognise is the phone itself has fundamentally changed over the last 2 decades. So when my children had their first phone, the only thing you could do with it was make a phone call and send a text. And again, for the reasons that have already been discussed, they got the phone because they were playing out. So you had that security aspect that they could always contact you and you could contact them. A phone now is a very, very different beast, and it should be treated exactly the same as any other, PC online device. And again, as parents and guardians, it's understanding the risks associated with those types of tools and making sure the appropriate applications, the appropriate controls are put in place. And I think that's key. And I'll come back to another big aspect is education. And it's not just about education the children, it's also about educating parents. Because again, technology is moving on at such a fast pace, is making sure that we all keep abreast of the that changing landscape and the risks that come with it.
Is there a right age, Sam?
Difficult to say. I think like social media they do define age limits. So Facebook, I think, is 13. Again, as the panel has said, I think having open communication and education is very important. Do you teach your child to speak to a stranger on the street? The same should be applied. Do you speak to a stranger online? So having open communication and learning and teaching your kids and yourself about what's happening out there.
Alan has had the benefit of half a dozen of your viewpoints and your wisdom now, so Alan will have the definitive answer to this question, I'm sure. We come to you.
I'm sorry, they've all stolen my thunder. But the best I can come up with is I think I'm the eldest person here. So when I was going to use a phone, my parents used to make sure I had 5p to get it in the kiosk. Yeah. Nowadays, you're lucky to be able to find a kiosk to use a public phone. So there is that age where, as I think they've all alluded to, the children are starting to be away from home and they may need to contact you. And from my perspective, that's when they need to be able to have the communication channel. That's not necessarily when they need to be able to go on social media. No. I mean, the parents have a responsibility here, but to their children, to protect their children from what's on social media, the inappropriate content, just as much as they have to enhancing the digital skills, going back to another question, of using these devices and getting used to them, because these are becoming the norm in everyday life.
It's interesting you say that. I remember if you were away or far away, I was allowed to reverse the charges. You were allowed to go in the phone box and ring the operator and reverse the charges. Open this one up to the panel. With the rise from working from home, and this touches on one or two of the questions we've had already, how are the panel managing the risk? In other ways, let me rephrase that. What are your individual firms doing to manage the risk? Has anything changed dramatically? Brian, you look well equipped to answer that one.
Thanks. At KPMG, we all basically work on the premise that you are remote anyway, because we're always in and out the office, so our systems are already configured for working remotely. During the pandemic and everything else, nothing really changed for us, but the monitoring and the oversight by the security team increased just as everybody stabilised, making sure the VPNs were set up, making sure the updates were pushed down to the computers and everything else. For us, we're used to it. For other organisations that weren't in that position, where they're in and out of the office, at clients and so on, it's a very different kettle of fish.
Mike, how does Shaw help introduce measures? What can it put in place to manage the risk? I know you've alluded to some of those before.
Yeah, and certainly working from home, it drives real benefits into organisations. But I suppose when you introduce any new policy or any new way of working, it is about looking at the risk and looking at what changes and how you mitigate it. And certainly, as Brian has already mentioned, there's a lot you can do from a security perspective, encryption, making sure devices are secure, etc. But the other aspect that we kind of touched on before when we talked about people online shopping is you're in your home environment, so you're naturally more relaxed in your home environment. So again, it's simple things such as when you're having a conference call, who can actually overhear you? You're still in a work environment there as well, and data protection, quite rightly, is always front of mind for all organisations. So actually, somebody overhearing a conversation could, in some instances, be treated and viewed as a data breach. So there's various different aspects that all businesses and organisations need to look at when you introduce any new process or policy, and working from home is a classic example of that.
Stripping it right back, you hear the talk of the same when we've all got an Alexa at home and who's potentially listening into that. Ian, what's from a Max Telecom perspective?
Yeah, I did do a talk on this earlier, so it's worth having a look at.
Yeah, it's been out there. There's a webinar, isn't there? Yeah.
But I think one of the key things is just making sure that you're constantly talking to your workforce, and make sure they can sort of raise issues and they know who to talk to if they experience something, or if they think there might have been a breach. It's important to have that communication channel between your remote worker and your people in the office.
And I think one important thing to actually add is that, obviously for this panel we're kind of concentrating on the security aspects, but again, other risks of working from home is also isolation and loneliness. So again, integration and teamwork, and making sure that employees who are working remotely potentially for a long period of time are actually supported. So health and well-being programs sit hand in hand with looking at security aspects as well from a risk and working from home perspective.
Sam, if we can just come back to you. Obviously, you're microgaming representing Love Tech today. What are the top cyber threats that you see from that perspective?
For me, the thing that keeps me up at night is cloud. COVID, I think, as bad as it's been amazing, because what it has done is that it's shown microgaming that we can be a borderless company completely. But we've put a lot of effort into cloud, and now we're in a space where we need to apply governance to cloud. And I think a lot of businesses, they almost call it the gold rush now. A lot of businesses are moving the on-premise data into the cloud, and they think that it just magically secures itself. But there's a lot of work effort, and I think right now that's a real threat to business, and it's a big risk. Because we talk about things like compliance, contract management, security controls, understanding the platform. So for me right now, it's cloud. It's keeping me up.
Let me ask the final question, which has been submitted, and I'll put it to all of you, if I may, starting with Professor Beaumont. What does risk management mean to each of you, each of the panel, and how do you deal with it in your organisation? So I suppose from a Blue Wave perspective, and I suppose if you want to embellish on that from a university perspective, if you know the answer to that.
Sure. I guess it starts with why, and that starts with what is the worst situation, and the worst situation is generally where you breach the trust of an employee or a customer, and that means being able to demonstrably show how you keep their data safe, what steps you take to secure the data, how you partition that data, and also, and this is an area that isn't really talked about enough, is how you prove that that data hasn't been altered, accessed by third parties. So this is the integrity part of cybersecurity. And this is around logging, around audit, and this is where technologies such as blockchain, for example, come into play, where you can create an irrefutable audit of your systems as a whole. I think that as we start to handle more and more data, we need to start talking about language such as defense in depth, data persistence. Why are we keeping data? Do we still need it? And start to look also at one of the complicated issues that was raised earlier around social media, for example, is how do we respect the individual's right to be forgotten? So they've given us their data, and they now have the right under GDPR to say, I don't want you to hold my data anymore. One, how do we find it? Two, how do we de-intermingle it from other data, accounting records, various other stuff? And then how do we assure the individual that we've got rid of all of those scraps of data? As systems start to overlap more and more, getting rid of data is a really big challenge. And the bigger the organization, the harder it is. So I'd challenge anybody to go to the NHS and say, I'd like some of my data removed. Some of it will be on paper, some of it will be on standalone systems, some of it will be in the cloud. One of the things that we need to move to as a society is to have a single irrefutable identifier for each citizen. So we don't have the John Smith or the Raj Patel challenge. We know which John Smith is which John Smith. If you look to digital nations such as Estonia, they've produced a digital identity for each citizen. So you can kind of have a straight edge for the data. You know exactly which John Smith is John Smith. And I think that integrity technology and talking about data integrity is going to be something that comes to the fore in terms of assuring the citizen that we've got the best interests at heart.
Thank you very much, Professor Beaumont. For Ran, how do you distinguish, or how does PwC distinguish their John Smiths from their Rav Patels?
Well, I would say, other than everything we've been talking, which has been very much focused on systems, I think the bigger threat is coming from humans. By that, what it means is going to the John Smith and all of that, no matter how much protection we put around, if someone sends an email with the wrong attachment to the wrong people or person, you are in breach. So by that, the main focus and one of the areas that we keep constantly training our people is in relation to educate them how to look after your own data and how to look after all the data around. So going to this point about risk management, what it means for us is there is the technical team that looks after all the technicality behind, but what's more really worried for us being a company that deals with management services and consultant, which is people, is education of the staff.
Brian, from a KPMG perspective, is it a similar approach?
It is a similar approach, and everything that's been said is completely valid. But one thing from my perspective and the way I see it looking out at organisations is fatigue and complacency now in people. People are fatigued with COVID, they're fatigued with working from home, they're fatigued with GDPR being bounded at them continuously, your data. People are just tired. You just got to keep their energy up to stay aware. And that's one of the biggest risks at the moment.
Well, what does risk management, Alan, mean to you and your team?
My bread and butter, really, yeah. Because the job of our office is to communicate this both internally to government and all the 23 government departments and regulated bodies we've got on the island, but also to the community and the businesses as well. And it's very much, it follows everything that everybody has said. I mean, Adam has alluded to the principles of GDPR there, you know, the right to be forgotten and things like that. You can't forget someone if you don't know where to find their data in your systems. So you have to have good records management, information asset registers. But when you're dealing with this stuff, you've got to consider it. And again, I'm going back to Adam, how much stuff are you keeping? Because the more you keep, the harder it is to find stuff in there or to deal with it. So the risk management has to be, what do I need for my business on a day-to-day basis? And I may need in the short term for anything that may crop up. And then balance that, securing that information against keeping your business running. Because you cannot let security stop your business operating. However, you can't ignore security. You have to. You've got legal obligations. Does that answer it? Or?
No, it does actually. Thank you. And moving on to the telecom providers now, Shaw and Manx Telecom. You've alluded to it to some degree because there was similarity to the previous question, but if you can just sum up to me what risk management means to each of you or your organisations. Shaw first.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, risk management is an integral part of our business and many businesses. So, as a telecommunications provider providing critical national infrastructure, not only do we have responsibilities of securing people's data and making sure that data is protected, but also in providing the services and critical emergency 999 services, mobile services and telephony services are critical to the island and to our communities. So there's risk involved in running those networks. There's risk involved in our employees. Face. We've talked about working from home to making sure that employees' well-being. So there's risk across all facets of running a business and an organisation. And the key thing is understanding those risks. So we have risk management team within our organisation. We have regular risk reviews. We empower our management team to look for risks and then come up with creative ways of actually how we manage those risks. So for me, risk management is an absolute integral part of running not only a telecommunications business but any organisation.
It goes hand in hand, Ian.
Yeah, it's looking at what's the value of things to you as a business or the community, and working out what the threats are to those things, and putting in controls that are appropriate to protect them. So we're like crossing the road. You look, if there's any cars, you wait. If it's a busy road, you have a traffic light system or a zebra crossing. So you want to have the controls in there that are appropriate to protect the people.
And Sam, again, I know you've touched upon this just before, but risk management from a microgaming and love tech perspective?
So I couldn't add really anything other than what the panel's already said. The last thing I would probably add is just being informed enough to help your executive team make really informed decisions around some of the business requirements they have. It's not my CEO's job to understand the details of deploying to the cloud. That's my job, but it's my job to inform them in such a way that they make a good decision for the business. That's the only part I'd probably add.
Thank you, Sam. It's always difficult when you're the final member of the panel answering a specific question, which is for everyone. Thank you, one and all. That really is a good way to round it off. Not just this discussion, but it actually concludes Virtual Cyber Isle 2020. My thanks again to the speakers, Professor Beaumont, Samantha, Brian, Ferran, Ian, Mike and Alan. Do appreciate your time. And also thank you, as well as the panel members who've answered your questions here today. Thank you for your questions, because, of course, they have been very much considered and certainly informative answers, I'm sure, that we've received over the past hour or so. You can view the Cyber 2020 Isle playlist on the Isle of Man Government YouTube today, and indeed everything over the past 5 weeks on the YouTube channel, the Isle of Man Government YouTube channel. I hope you found it beneficial. Thank you once again. Thank you to all the organisers of not just today's event, but Cyber Isle 2020. And until next time, and hopefully Cyber Isle 2021, goodbye.